We are following the latest on Capitol Hill, where the Senate is meeting soon and is expected to vote on a budget deal. Congress must pass a bill by midnight to avoid another government shutdown. The measure funds the government for 6 weeks, raises federal budget caps for 2 years, while allotting $165 billion towards defense spending and $131 billion for domestic spending.
However, it doesn't address immigration. Now, after the Senate votes, the bill goes to the House, where it's already facing opposition from both Republicans and Democrats. But House Speaker Paul Ryan says he believes they will get the measure passed. So for more on this, let's bring in Olivier Knox. He's the chief Washington correspondent for Yahoo News. So this is really interesting. I mean, explain for our audience what hurdles the spending bill faces once it passes the Senate and moves to the House.
Well, one of the major challenges is that the Republicans won't be able to get this through just with GOP votes. There's a faction of the Republicans in the House that has already come out and said they're not going to back it. With their defection, Paul Ryan needs Democratic votes to get this through the House. Now, we expect this deal to get through the Senate. Obviously, anything can happen in Washington these days, but we expect it to get through the Senate. And then in the House, the question is, can Paul Ryan wrangle enough Democratic votes to get this deal through? Now, you could say if the Eagles can win the Super Bowl, maybe Washington can break out of its dysfunction. They're closing in on a 2-year budget deal, which would be really interesting as well. That would totally shatter the budget caps that were imposed in 2011, boost military spending, boost domestic spending, kick the debt limit fight to beyond the midterm elections, and so. Maybe cross your fingers, we might be rewriting the way we do business in D.C.
As we mentioned, this bill does not include anything about DACA or immigration. Nancy Pelosi spoke on the House floor for 8 hours demanding some action on Dreamers. So that was impressive. She broke a record. But where do we go from here in terms of this debate?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because basically what Nancy Pelosi wants is she wants a firm and, dare I say, public commitment from Speaker Ryan to hold a sort of a clean vote on DACA, on immigration. It's a pretty big priority of Democrats. I don't really know where it goes from here. You know, Paul Ryan has his weekly press conference at 11:30. I'm sure he'll be pressed on this issue. We might know more then. But it's when Nancy Pelosi comes out and says she can't vote for this bill because it doesn't address immigration, she's in effect giving the liberal part of the House Democratic Caucus license to vote against it as well. And that adds a little bit to the uncertainty of whether this will pass or not.
So, Olivier, let's switch gears now and talk about White House Staff Secretary Rob Porter resigning. This comes after abuse allegations from his 2 ex-wives. They were made public. Sources tell CBS News the White House knew about the accusations and still hired him. This has huge implications, and it's not really a partisan issue because the White House secretary, as you know, but I don't know if our viewers know, is responsible for seeing all sorts of classified information that goes across the president's desk. And he didn't have that top secret clearance because of these allegations. So what are you hearing about how this will impact the Trump administration moving forward?
So you're right. The staff secretary is actually, I would argue, the most powerful position you've never heard of. Well, not you, but people generally have not heard of. Basically, every piece of paper that comes out of the White House goes through the staff secretary's hands before it ever gets to the president. As you pointed out, that includes a fair amount of classified information. In terms of the security clearance, look, it's a little complicated, but basically, the president can clear anyone he wants, right? So on some level, if the president has faith in you, you can get this temporary clearance, or you can just be cleared in. I don't know how much that's going to affect it, but losing someone like Rob Porter will certainly slow down an already not super efficient shop. I have to say the allegations, it appears that the FBI, which does background checks for all these security clearances, alerted the White House at least last year that there were these issues in Mr. Porter's background. The White House initially stood by him, and then, of course, the world got a look at the photographs, some of which you're posting now, and that sort of changed things. But even after they basically pushed him out, said he was resigning, they put out an initial wave of supportive statements, which they've now tried to backtrack from. I expect this to come up in some detail at today's White House briefing.
So Rob Porter is also dating White House Communications Director Hope Hicks. She's a little bit of sort of a tabloid darling, and so her personal life has made it into the news as well. But other than that, why is that problematic?
Well, Actually, you tell me. I'm not sure why it is problematic. I mean, I don't know why she's why her personal life is getting pulled into this. I mean, obviously, these are serious allegations against him. The broader question is who in the White House knew about this? How high up did they make a decision to keep him on despite these allegations? By the way, there are police reports. These women told the FBI this during the process of looking into his background for security clearances. These aren't just wild allegations being thrown around. There's actually a pretty long paper trail, including at one point a restraining order against Mr. Porter.
But I think perhaps the reason why her name has been raised is because she had a hand, at least in crafting the initial statements in support of him when they first broke. And so the question is there, and I don't know the answer to this, but is there, the question to reporters and to others, is there an ethical or a conflict of interest there in crafting a statement when you are romantically involved with somebody who's been
accused? And it also goes to, I think, what Olivier said, which is who knew how much when, you know? Yeah.
I think, yeah, and I not to keep going back to this, but you know, I would look at Chief of Staff John Kelly as well as someone who probably needs to answer a few questions about this. I understand why why we're talking about Hope and why we're talking about her romantic entanglement with Mr. Porter. It doesn't start and stop with Hope Hicks. This is a much broader issue. You know, did the president sign off on keeping him on board, even though he knew about this? You know, there were allegations of similar actions by the president's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon. It's not just Hope. This is something that goes, as far as we know, across the administration. Who knew and when and why? And was there a decision made just to disregard it? Was there a decision made that these weren't credible? I just don't know. And that's some of the stuff that we're digging into now. But it appears that they knew from the FBI about these really troubling allegations last year.
So let's wrap this up, Olivier, and let me ask you this question. How big of a deal is this for the Trump administration? This is an administration that has weathered many such controversies, and with the folks who support the president, it doesn't seem to always stick. So I'm just curious what your take is on the controversy.
Well, I mean, whether it'll stick or not, I don't know. You're right. We keep lurching from one problem to another. We've seen a really incredible purge of Trump aides since he took office a year ago. You know, people online have made it sort of a pastime to find photographs of those early days of the Trump administration and counting how many of the aides in the photos are still around. You know, whether it's the chief of staff, the national security advisor, the senior strategist, the communications directors, you know, Sean Spicer, the press secretary. I mean, it's
Omarosa. There's so many people. Right.
But the difference between, say, losing Omarosa, who no one actually knows what she did in the White House. The difference in losing Omarosa and losing your staff secretary is there's a chasm there. The staff secretary is extremely important. You really can't have a joker in that job. It's extremely important. If you talk to White House veterans, they'll tell you, like, this is one of the most important jobs inside the White House. And so finding someone who will do the job and will do it well is really, really important to presidents.
Olivier, what about Chief of Staff Kelly, though? I mean, when he was appointed to that position, the whole conversation was, finally, we have an adult in the room. Right. And, you know, slowly there have been other headlines indicating otherwise. And then you have this, and he presented this, you know, impassioned character assessment of Porter that was glowing, and then very quickly had to sort of backtrack on that. But even his backtrack sort of offered a bit of a caveat. He was like, but I still believe he's a great guy, essentially.
It seems as if Kelly is the things you're talking about also have to include the chief of staff, who's been caught up in saying certain things, whether it's regarding Dreamers or regarding a member of Congress.
If it doesn't stick to the president, will it stick to the chief of staff?
Yeah, good question.
That's a good question. You know, Democrats, there was this brief boomlet of, oh, thank heavens, finally an effective, you know, military chief of staff. If nothing else, you know, he'll keep the trains running on time. He'll keep all the crazies out of the Oval Office. There was that sort of boomlet. And then over time, you know, Democrats have decided that John Kelly is actually as much of an immigration hawk as the president is, except that he's more organized about it. Sure, there are going to be questions. You remember when John Kelly had that dust-up with Congresswoman Federica Wilson about the president's phone call to a woman whose son was killed in that raid in Africa. I don't know how much it sticks to him, but I mean, let's just be clear. The issue of renewing a temporary security clearance, the issue of keeping Rob Porter in the White House was much more John Kelly's call than it was, say, Hope Hicks's call.
Got it. Olivier Knox, always great to talk to you, my friend. Thank you very much.